Hello and welcome to PocketGamer.biz's weekly news digest. This is for the week ending the 30th of January 2015. I'm Jon Jordan. So kind of getting into the year proper, and we're starting to get some, not really the weeks before weren't proper news, but I guess some more kind of hard news and some figures. So actually we're kind of entering the first kind of wave of financial reporting. So for people who like numbers like me, that's kind of both an exciting time and also a bit of a I guess I don't know what the word is, a bit of a kind of a fraught time really, because there's so many companies now who have mobile games as part of their kind of business. We reckon there's about kind of 35 to 40 companies globally who are on various stock exchanges, from the US to Paris to China to Japan to Korea, who will be putting out figures about their performance. And equally, in some of those cases, there will be very kind of atomic reasons why their sales have gone up and down. They might have a big hit game, or they might have had a big hit game a year ago, so that will mean their sales will be up, or their sales will be down year on year. But equally, as you kind of if you crunch all the figures, and that's kind of the problem, is you have to crunch all the figures to get the kind of like global data. You can start to see some big global trends happening as you kind of go through them all. As part of it always kind of goes in waves, so you always get the Americans first. So we had Apple this week; they were announcing their financials. It was the record financial for Apple, and indeed it was the record amount of profit for any company ever in the history of companies having profit. So they had, I think it was $18 billion of profit. Doesn't really matter; the numbers really matter. Actually successful, and I guess the interesting thing was, as has always been the case with Apple, North American market is its biggest market for iPhone, and that's where the majority of its revenue is coming from. iPad actually dropped in sales. That's been happening for a while now because people don't update their iPads as frequently as they do their iPhones. But so North America is the biggest. Europe, I guess unsurprisingly, is in second place, but probably next quarter it'll be overtaken by China. So for the first time, or not the first time, but China's been in third place for a while for the States, for Apple, and but it's growing so massively. It's growing like 70% year on year, whereas Europe's only growing about 20% year on year. So you're kind of having this kind of everyone knew, because China's just such a big country, that China will it will be the number one market for probably all handset manufacturers at a certain point in the future. But it happened with Apple this year, this quarter. And then the first of the kind of games companies to announce its financials is EA. So EA Mobile is obviously part of EA. EA kind of breaks out some of EA Mobile's financials. Doesn't break out profit on that business unit. So it announces its revenue for different platforms. So it announces revenue for different consoles, including mobile, and then will announce its profits for the entire company. So you kind of get an idea about what's going on with EA and mobile, but you don't really get an idea compared to a company like Glue, say, which is purely mobile, so you can see its profit and loss. With EA, it was kind of a bit of a plateau quarter, really. So it was in terms of sales were $121 million, which was actually kind of year on year it's up. But quarter on quarter, which is kind of tends to be now we're seeing games as a service rather than the retail model. We tend to look at kind of quarter on quarter changes rather than year on year quarter changes. And so actually it was kind of steady, but it was effectively down about 1% compared to last quarter, and that quarter was effectively down about 1% from the previous quarter. So you kind of see with EA, EA mobile sales have kind of plateaued for the past kind of 9 months. Which obviously isn't a great thing. Most companies want to see their sales going up. With EA Mobile, it's kind of there are kind of good things coming out of it. So it's obviously EA is known for its sports franchises, so Madden and FIFA and some other ones, but they're the main ones. And on mobile, as on across its entire kind of game portfolio, just the amount of people playing those games is going up. The amount of time they're spending in those games is going up. So there's a very strong kind of core bit for EA. In terms of kind of mobile hits, the big kind of hit it had in the quarter was the Sims building game. That's done about 20 million downloads. Revenue-wise, kind of we'll have to see where we are with that. EA didn't really talk about revenues at all, but they've not really had a massive hit like The Simpsons, which is now into its kind of, depending on whether you count the first launch as a launch that kind of happened, because it launched and then they pulled it for 6 months. But that was a really big game that generated hundreds of millions of dollars, or at least over $100 million, maybe $200 million now. Not really had a big kind of hit that quarter on quarter just generates money like that. So EA, being EA, very bullish, and they've been talking about the games are going to announce next quarter. So we'll have to see. But that's a kind of a bit of a bellwether, really, I suppose, that even though the mobile market is growing very quickly, some of these companies who, $120 billion, is $120 million, sorry, is a reasonable sum of money. but it's not seeing growth. It's kind of seeing a bit of a plateau there. So we'll kind of start to see some of the other US companies next week probably. So we see kind of people like Zynga and Glue, and then we go kind of move on to the Japanese, and we'll get a better view there. There was another company who is kind of interesting. So Kabam, pretty well known, completely free to play. They just sold off a lot of their PC business, so they're pretty much now a mobile free to play player. They're based in the US, but most of their developments in China. Pretty big company now, like 800 people, and everyone's assuming that they're going to IPO at some point, so they're going to start selling their shares. They announced last year. At the start of the year, they announced kind of they were going to be quite bullish on doing an IPO. Then, as I guess to a degree, the market kind of softened, and King's IPO did not go well at all, which followed Zynga's IPO not going very well the year before. So games companies are not that hot in terms of IPOing and then seeing growth of their shares. So Kabam's kind of taken a decision, we assume, not to IPO at the moment, but it's been very open with its financials. So it announced 2013 it had sales of $360 million, didn't announce profit, but said it was profitable. And then this year it announced sales of $400 million for 2014. So that's kind of, that's reasonable growth. That's kind of 10%-ish, over 10% growth. The only kind of problem for Kabam was it had been so bullish that in April last year it had announced that it thought its sales for 2014 were going to be in the region of $550 to $600 million. So obviously it was way off that, a third, potentially as much as a third off what it predicted. So it couldn't really, it had to say why that had happened, and it kind of said that its publishing business hadn't performed as well as it thought. It was going to move into a kind of a less is more situation. It was going to release fewer games and have higher quality games. It delayed some of its games. So one of its hot games at the moment is the Marvel Conquest of Champions, which is a very good game. That got pushed. It's got a Fast and Furious game coming out that's been delayed as well, and that's going to end up. It's not a game that's based on the new movie. It's a Fast and Furious Legacy, so it's more like a game that kind of plays across all the Fast and Furious IP. But they're going to they've held that back to launch it with the movie. So kind of a few things they could point to. But I guess the most interesting one was. They said explicitly they were kind of staffing up their consumer support teams for their free-to-play titles. There had been some complaints about those in the past. We've seen that on our website. But the kind of key thing that I kind of noted and was surprised that it was mentioned was they said they were going to ease some of their monetization on some of their games. So that's something I've looked at, and we've looked at Pocket Gamer Biz for kind of constantly. Really, we've had the column called The Monetizer, where we've kind of analysed games to see how well they monetize and kind of what kind of techniques they've used. And typically, Kabam games, while always of a very high quality, have had what we might call or we have called an aggressive monetization policy. Now, that aggressive monetization is not a moral term. We're not saying they're being nasty and trying to kind of rip money off people, but just compared to other games, there's things they have done and things they haven't done compared to what we might call average monetization games. So one of the things we look at is called Reciprocity, and that's very simple. That's kind of when you start playing a game, normally a game will give you some hard currency, so the currency you would normally earn in very small amounts or buy in big amounts with cash. It gives you some of that to kind of get you going in the game to explain to you how the game economy works, and get you kind of going into the game store and probably buying something or using those gems. Kabam games kind of quite singularly haven't really done that. They've maybe done a bit of it, but say the current game that I've been playing, as well as the Marvel game, is the Hunger game, if that makes sense. And that it's striking. You start playing that game. I'm playing it for a lot, and not only do they not give you any hard currency. It's called Sparks. So there's no reciprocity. Reciprocity is basically someone does something nice for you, and then you feel nicer towards them. That's the psychological term I read in a book, apparently. But not only do they not give you any, but when you play the game, you don't earn any either. So basically, you have this big zero sitting in the top right-hand corner of your screen all the time, which is a bit demoralising. But they've just updated the game, and presumably as part of this new kind of philosophy they have, suddenly you can have 10 sparks. I've got 10 sparks that I didn't have beforehand. Now, 10 sparks is actually not very much, so it's about 70 sparks to the dollar. So they've given me 14 cents, effectively. Basically, this is 14 cents across millions of people, and that effectively in-game currency is I mean, they're not really giving millions of pounds away, but to a degree you can see kind of what they're doing with that. So we'll kind of look to see kind of how Kabam kind of rolls out this kind of new idea. But it's kind of interesting, I think, and it shows a bit of maturing of the free-to-play industry, where previously it was very kind of short-term driven, even for companies that weren't publicly owned. So obviously, as we say, EA has to show its quarters every 3 months. It has to say financially how well it's doing. Private companies like Kabam haven't had to do that. But obviously, I think we kind of get into a market now where players understand there's lots of games they can play. They prefer to play games that are obviously that they like, but equally games that are just nicer to them and give them a bit more stuff, and aren't really asking them for money all the time, or kind of requiring you can do this now if you pay, or you're gonna have to wait. So I think we're seeing a maturing on that, and it's interesting with Kabam, who really know how to do free-to-play games, have a lot of analytics skill, and they've actively kind of said that they're kind of like dialing down monetisation, and kind of what they're looking to do with that obviously is keep players in the game by giving them more stuff, getting them playing longer. So that's an engagement kind of retention tool for getting them playing longer, in the hopes or the expectations that those guys will then be playing longer, they'll be more attached to the game, that they will end up kind of paying more in the long term. So Kabam's not doing it to lose money, it's doing it in the long term to make more money. So the technical term is lifetime value. So LTV, you see this a lot in kind of articles. People looking, what's the LTV of your user? So basically, when you have a user, what's their entire value once they start the game and when they end the game? How much money are you getting? So obviously, everyone wants to see their lifetime value going up. So that's kind of interesting thing. I guess the biggest trend of the week. But just one quick one to mention. So it's the Super Bowl this Sunday. So obviously a big thing in North America, not so big outside the world, although it is shown on UK television now. And we are actually seeing, so we've got this crazy situation that we call extreme user acquisition, extreme UA, where the Super Bowl advert break is always known as the most expensive ad break in I guess in the world, or certainly in American TV, in terms of the money you spend for the seconds of TV advertising. Obviously the famous Apple adverts over history. And for the first time we're seeing mobile games who are going to be doing ads in the Super Bowl this year. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Supercell, who have tons of money and have one of the top grossing games in the world in Clash of Clans, are going to be doing some Clash of Clans advertising in the Super Bowl. But then kind of a smaller upstart called Ucall, who have a game called Heroes Charge, which is a much more hardcore kind of 2D squad RPG type game, and they've kind of jumped into the market into kind of TV user acquisition. Really, only in the past kind of couple of months, they did some big campaigns over the Christmas period, and they've got a 15-second advert which they're doing in the Super Bowl. Then they're running it onto American kind of TV channels as well. So it's kind of interesting that companies are prepared to spend now tens of millions of dollars potentially to do this kind of big advertising that we would have expected kind of Coke and people like that to do. So we'll be looking forward to that on the Super Bowl.